Hansen. And the issue they used was he omitted his wife's finances on his financial disclosure documents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
this is the third time they've tried to come after him with criminal proceedings. The first two times he's been exonerated. This third time they come after him with criminal proceedings. Go ahead.
Yes. Now, to do that, they had to do several things. First, they had to ignore the fact that the Ethics Committee accommodated the congressman's filings due to his unique legal circumstance. They also had to ignore the fact that when the Ethics in Government Act was passed, if there were genuine violations here, there were supposed to be civil sanctions imposed.
Yes.
Not criminal sanctions.
Yes.
So here's what they did. Weingarten and Cole, they contrived a criminal case against Congressman Hansen by invoking a catch-all provision in criminal law. It's 18 U.S.C. 1001. Essentially, it says it's illegal to submit a false document to the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in order to appreciate here the scope and depth of the treachery that was used to ensnare Congressman Hansen, we also have to consider other high-profile cases that were taking place during that time. Now, in 1984, this is when Ed Meese was appointed to the position of Attorney General by President Ronald Reagan. During his confirmation hearings, it was revealed that Ed Meese had not included his wife's finances on his financial disclosure filings.
Yes.
He said that he had inadvertently failed to list them, and he was in the process of amending his financial disclosure.
Because he got caught. Exactly. But they give him a pass for the same thing that they are going after Congressman Hansen for. And it's a civil violation in the case of Congressman Hansen, but they go after him criminally, even though they give Ed Meese, who has been Ronald Reagan's, at this time, he has been Ronald Reagan's counselor since the beginning of the Reagan administration in 1980. He had worked with him as governor, as Reagan was governor in California. Now he's going to become Attorney General, and they give him a pass on that. They even actually gave him a pass on some things that did look like there were some quid pro quos in his past. He had a guy, Thomas Barrick, gave him $70,000 in order to help him sell his house. Subsequently was appointed Deputy Undersecretary of the Interior. Another guy, John McKean, gave Meese $60,000 in personal loans. Subsequently was named to the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors. So you got Reagan's close Confederate, essentially his legal counselor, the guy that's going to become his attorney general. He's given a pass on these things that they came after that they falsely accused Congressman Hansen of, and giving him a pass on the non-disclosure of the money that his wife earned. Is that correct?
You are exactly correct. It gets even worse. Remember, 1984 was the election year.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Mondale was running as the Democrat for the president. He chose Representative Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate. It was determined, she was vetted out then, that indeed she had not included her husband's financial transactions on her disclosure documents. Her reason was she claimed that she didn't understand the law. Well, in fact, her husband had many shady business dealings, including an enterprise known as Star Distributors. They were a major distributor of pornography linked to organized crime. So
So she didn't want to have that disclosed, so she basically excluded his information, and she kept it that way, didn't she? I don't think she never did disclose voluntarily his financial information. Is that correct?
She never did, and she escaped with impunity.
You know, when I was looking this up, I had forgotten about this. The New York Times article from 2008, as they were looking at Sarah Palin, who had just been picked, they said, you know, maybe McCain didn't vet her too well. Remember what happened when Mondale picked Geraldine Ferrara and all these things blew up? You know, maybe the same thing's going to happen with Palin. So they went back and they rehashed this in the New York Times, and they said that her husband had been fined $750 by the FEC for loaning $110,000 to her campaign, her congressional campaign in '78. Now, that was 110 times what the legal limit was. He could have loaned her $1,000, but he loaned her $110,000 and was only fined $750. Now, her children gave her $24,000 over the $3,000 legal limit as well. Nothing happened to them. Compare that to what happened to Dinesh D'Souza today, where we see that not only did he not just get a slap on the wrist with a $750 fine, he was criminally prosecuted and is going to jail. That's similar to what we're seeing happening with Mr. Hansen, Congressman Hansen.
Well, yes, indeed, you're right again. And it's even worse. Congressman Hansen's staff attorney, James McKenna, he researched the matter further, and he discovered, I don't remember the exact number, but it was somewhere between a fourth and a third of the members of the House of Representatives did not include their spouse's finances on their disclosure documents.
There you go.
Across the board,
Yeah.
they were allowed to amend their disclosure statements without consequence.
So very, very selective prosecution of Congressman Hansen for things that very high-profile candidates have done and that a third of the congressional candidates have done as well. But they come after him, and not even for the civil penalty, but for the criminal penalty. So then tell us what happens.
Yes. Senator Hatch summarized it quite well in an article that he wrote titled George Hansen and Congressional Intent. And here's his final paragraph. He says, George Hansen has lost his recent reelection attempt by less than 100 votes, a loss undoubtedly attributable to his criminal trial. This is a tragic mistake. We certainly should not compound this error by unconstitutionally sending him to prison.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, Congressman Hansen, the one who worked directly with the Ethics Committee to reconcile his filings commensurate with his unique legal situation, he ends up being prosecuted by James Cole at the Justice Department.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And James Cole, who is now the Deputy Attorney General, the second highest, actually, I guess right now, until he resigns, he's announced that he's going to resign as well. So at the moment, I guess he is the highest ranking person in the Department of Justice. Now, he is ultimately convicted in a rigged trial because the district judge would not allow correspondence between Congressman Hansen and the Ethics Committee that would have exonerated him. They keep that evidence that would have exonerated him out of the trial. So it's a rigged trial. And he's found guilty. He is sent to jail for a year and a half. I think he's fined $40,000. But the story doesn't end there, does it?
No, indeed it does not. And you are right. In 1986, after many years of fighting government injustices, he is sent to prison. His crime? He didn't commit any crime. The government had to manufacture one in order to ensnare him. And one journalist who was really on top of all this, he was working at the time for Human Events, and that's Stanton Evans. And he explained the odious situation succinctly. This is what he wrote. In 1977, he, George Hansen, and his wife executed a property division in the state of Idaho so that she could raise money apart from his campaign finances, to pay legal bills. This division was reported to and ratified by the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives. Then Evans goes on to write, apologists for Ferraro argue that her cases and Hanson's are different, as indeed they are. Hanson, he had legal grounds for not reporting his wife's financial dealings.
Right. Yeah.
He had the advice of two attorneys saying he should not report them, and the response from the Ethics Committee that was attested by Representative Wiggins saying that, yes, this was proper conduct.
So let's bring this back. Let's bring this kind of into the future here. So we've got a situation where the Department of Justice persecutes this guy. And of course, Ed Meese, who at that time is the head of the Department of Justice and who himself was guilty of far more egregious offenses than Congressman Hanson, he lets that stand. And Congressman Hanson continues to try to clear his name, and eventually the Supreme Court does exonerate him of all these charges, but that takes till 1995. It's 11 years later, after he's been fined $40,000, after he's out of Congress, after he's served a year and a half in prison. And so what we see here is we see the Republican administration of Ronald Reagan and Ed Meese essentially doing the same kinds of dirty tricks against somebody who speaks up trying to reform the IRS. And now we bring this into the future. We see that the leadership of the GOP is really not doing much to put pressure on stopping these persecutions of Tea Party people because, in my opinion, I think they're just as much of a pariah to the current GOP leadership as someone who wanted to shake up the IRS was to the Republican leadership 30, 40 years ago.
Well, indeed, yes, that's true. And while all this was happening, meanwhile, the media whores were busy publishing articles claiming that George Hanson was sent to prison for lying on his ethics forms.
Yeah, which they didn't even allow in evidence.
Media lie that was sold to the public.
Yes, yes. And they could get away with it in those days as well. One of the things that he tried to do was to come up with a Congressional Accountability Project that would inform people instantly of how their congressman voted, because in those days they didn't have the internet. Today we can do that. And even though we understand where this corruption, this criminal behavior is coming from, we apparently are still impotent to do anything about it, because not only do we see the same practices being done decades later, but even the same people being rewarded and promoted. So you've got James Cole, who is head of the division, doing these persecutions, and not even prosecutions, they were persecutions of Congressman Hanson. He's now been rewarded in a Democrat administration, being put as the second person in charge of the Justice Department.
Indeed, you're right. And as you say, today we have the fulminating IRS Tea Party scandal that supposedly is being investigated by the FBI and the Justice Department. Last August, Jay Sekulow, he's the chief attorney at the Center for Law and Justice, he declared, and the truth is that evidence clearly shows the DOJ was involved in the coordinated targeting and was directly engaged with IRS officials, including Lois Lerner, to piece together criminal prosecutions against Tea Party clients without any evidence of wrongdoing. Now, last February, Jay Sekulow bitterly complained to Congress that the FBI had not interviewed any of his Tea Party clients. At that time, not a single Tea Party victim was interviewed by the FBI. Last June, when Sekulow learned about the coordinated effort involving the Public Integrity Section and the IRS working together to try to contrive criminal prosecution